This is a story about a river, the Coosa River in Alabama, flowing past the Henderson plantation with water that looked peaceful in summer sunlight and murderous in spring floods. This is a story about 13 men who drowned in that river over 9 years. 13 overseers who supervised 163 enslaved people with whips and chains and casual violence. 13 men who went into the water and never came out. The masters called it cursed ground. They called it bad luck. They called it God's judgment. They never called it what it was: murder. Systematic, patient, perfectly executed murder, conducted over 9 years by a 28-year-old enslaved woman named Ruth Freeman, who washed clothes in that river 6 days a week and who understood something the masters never grasped: that a helpful woman offering to guide men across a river is the last person those men will ever suspect. This is the story of Ruth Freeman. Born enslaved 1821, aged 28 when her campaign began in April 1849, with a killing that nearly ended before it started, when her first victim almost strangled her to death underwater, and Ruth had to fight for her life while drowning him. Age 37 when it ended in November 1858, with 13 dead men and a plantation so terrified of the river that they discontinued the overseer position entirely. 87 enslaved people worked 3 years without overseers because of what Ruth did. 3 years of relative peace purchased with 13 lives taken in cold water. This is the story of how one woman turned a river into a weapon, and 9 years of perfect patience into the most successful campaign of resistance in American slavery history. The year is 1849, and the Henderson plantation is a kingdom of suffering. 3,000 acres of Alabama cotton fields stretching along the Coosa River, 28 miles south of Montgomery. Master Richard Henderson owns 163 enslaved people who generate enormous wealth through labor that breaks bodies and souls. The plantation operates with brutal efficiency, maintained by 4 overseers, white men hired to supervise field hands with authority to punish however they see fit. Henderson pays each overseer $150 annually, plus housing and a percentage of profits. The 4 overseers in April 1849 are men who have made cruelty their profession. Jacob Patterson, age 34, head overseer, who whips women with particular enthusiasm and keeps account of lashes delivered carved into his whip handle. Marcus Stone, age 29, assistant overseer, known for making children watch their parents being beaten as a control technique. William Clark, age 42, field overseer, alcoholic who drinks whiskey from dawn until midnight and becomes more violent with each drink. Thomas Green, age 26, newest overseer, trying to prove himself through escalating brutality that makes even the other overseers uncomfortable. These 4 men control every aspect of daily life for 163 people with absolute power and 0 consequences. They are the visible face of slavery's violence, and one of them is about to die badly. Ruth Freeman is born enslaved in 1821 on a tobacco plantation in Georgia. Her mother dies when Ruth is 7 from infection after being whipped for working too slowly while sick. Her father's identity is never discussed. Ruth grows up knowing that asking questions about fathers or family or anything else can get you sold away or worse. She works as a child in the fields, then as a teenager learning to sew, then at age 17 as a house slave in the big house where she is considered attractive by master's standards, which means she is in constant danger from white men who believe black women's bodies belong to them. In 1839, Master's son corners her in a storage room and tries to rape her. Ruth fights back with unexpected violence, breaking his nose with a brass candlestick and leaving him bleeding on the floor. She is whipped until she passes out and sold the next day before she regains consciousness. Ruth arrives at Henderson Plantation in March 1840 with scars covering her back and something cold and calculating taking shape in her mind. She is 19 years old. She has learned that fighting directly means punishment. She has learned that the system will always protect white men and never protect black women. She has learned that survival requires intelligence and patience and the ability to hide murderous thoughts behind a mask of obedience. For 9 years, Ruth works in the fields, picks cotton, survives beatings and harassment and the daily grinding horror of slavery. Something crystallizes in her during these years, something patient and ruthless that waits for the right moment. That moment arrives in April 1849, when Master Henderson assigns her a new position: washerwoman. The previous washerwoman, an elderly woman named Sarah, dies in March 1849 from pneumonia. Henderson needs a replacement for someone to wash clothes for the big house and for the 4 overseers. The job is considered lighter than field work, though it means scrubbing heavy fabrics by hand in river water for hours daily. Henderson chooses Ruth, who is 28, strong from field work, and has never attempted escape or shown open rebellion. Ruth accepts the assignment without visible emotion. Inside, she is already planning. The river. 6 days a week, alone at the river. The overseers' clothes washed at the river. The overseers themselves sometimes coming to the river to bathe or cross to the north fields. The river that floods in spring and has strong currents in winter and has depth variations that Ruth can learn. The river that could drown a man if that man was drunk or distracted or trusting the wrong person to help him cross. Ruth has been given access to a weapon. She spends the next 6 months learning how to use it with lethal precision. Ruth begins working as a washerwoman in April 1849. Every morning except Sunday, she walks to the river carrying baskets of dirty laundry. The washing site is a section of the Coosa River where the water is relatively calm and the bank slopes gently. Ruth scrubs clothes against rocks, rinses them in current, spreads them on bushes to dry. The work is monotonous, but Ruth barely notices because she is conducting a study. She studies the river with the focus of someone planning murder. She learns that in summer, the water is low and warm and slow-moving. In fall, it drops further, exposing rocks and sandbars. In winter, it rises with rain, and the current strengthens, and the water becomes cold enough to shock breathing. In spring, it floods and becomes a churning mass capable of sweeping away anything. Ruth learns the depths by wading daily for washing, ankle-deep near the banks, knee-deep 10 feet out, waist-deep 20 feet out, over her head in the channel 30 feet from shore. She learns where the bottom is solid clay and where it's slippery mud that can pull shoes off feet. She learns where rocks create dangerous footing and where underwater roots tangle like rope. She learns the current patterns, where water flows smooth and where it pulls unexpectedly toward the deepest channel. She memorizes all of this over months while appearing to simply wash clothes. By September 1849, 6 months after starting, Ruth knows this section of the Coosa River better than anyone on the plantation. She knows it well enough to kill someone in it. She just needs the right opportunity and the courage to act. Both arrived together on October 7, 1849. William Clark staggers to the river at dusk on a Tuesday. He is drunk, which is his default state, weaving and mumbling as he approaches where Ruth is finishing her washing. "Girl," he calls out, his speech slurred and hostile. "Need to cross the river. Check the north fields before dark. You're gonna help me." It's not a request. Ruth looks at him standing 30 feet away, swaying like a tree in a wind. The river at this point is 60 feet wide. The crossing route goes through water that's knee-deep near banks but waist-deep in the middle with current strong enough to move a drunk man off his feet. Ruth makes her decision in a heartbeat. This is the moment. This is the opportunity. This drunk, violent man is going to die in this river tonight, and Ruth is going to kill him. "Yes, sir," she says quietly. "Current's strong tonight and water's cold. Let me help you cross safe." She wades toward him, offers her arm for support. Clark grabs her arm roughly, nearly pulling her off balance, and they step into the water together. Ruth guides him slowly into deeper water, letting him lean his weight on her, moving toward the section she's chosen. Ankle deep, knee deep. Clark is breathing hard from the cold and the effort. They reach waist-deep water in the middle of the crossing. The current is pulling at their legs. Ruth positions them carefully over the section of bottom she knows is slippery mud mixed with smooth stones. "Almost across, sir," she says. "Just a few more steps." Clark takes another step. His foot slides on the slick bottom exactly as Ruth knew it would. He stumbles forward, releases Ruth's arm to catch himself, and plunges face first into the water. What happens next nearly ends Ruth's campaign before it truly begins. Clark goes under and comes up thrashing, disoriented and panicked, but not helpless. He's drunk, but he's also a large man, 200 pounds of muscle and rage. His hand shoots out and grabs Ruth's dress at the shoulder. He's drowning, and his drowning instinct is to grab anything for support. Ruth tries to step back, but Clark's grip is iron. He pulls her toward him, yanks her off balance. Ruth falls forward into the water. Now they're both underwater in chest-deep current, and Clark's hand is moved from her dress to her throat. He's strangling her. Not deliberately, not consciously, just the blind panic of a drowning man trying to climb on top of anything to reach air. Ruth feels his fingers crushing her windpipe. She can't breathe. She's underwater and being strangled simultaneously, and the current is pulling them both downstream. Black spots appear in her vision. She's going to die. She's going to drown, trying to drown her first victim, and her body will be found tangled with his, and everyone will know she tried to kill him. The realization creates desperate clarity. Ruth stops trying to pull away from Clark's grip. Instead, she drives forward, using the current's momentum, and slams her knee into Clark's groin with every ounce of strength she possesses. Clark's grip loosens for 1 second. Ruth rips his hand away from her throat, surfaces, gasping, gets her feet under her. Clark surfaces too, coughing water, reaching for her again. Ruth doesn't give him the chance. She grabs his head with both hands, one on his forehead and one on the back of his skull, and drives him down under the water with all her body weight. He thrashes violently. His hands clawed her arms, drawing blood, but Ruth has oxygen in her lungs and solid footing on the river bottom and pure, murderous determination. She holds him under. 30 seconds. 40. His thrashing weakens. 50 seconds. 60. He stops moving. Ruth holds him down for another 30 seconds to be certain. Then she releases him, steps back, watches his body float face down in the current and drift downstream to catch on rocks 20 feet away. Ruth stands in the waist-deep water with her hands shaking, her throat bruised, her arms bleeding from Clark's fingernails, her lungs burning. That was nearly a disaster. She almost died. But she didn't. She won. William Clark is dead and Ruth is alive, and no one saw what happened. Ruth wades to the bank, gathers her washing baskets, and walks back to the plantation without looking at the body. Her hands don't stop shaking for 3 hours. Clark's body is discovered the next morning by field hands. Master Henderson conducts an investigation. Ruth is questioned. She has prepared her story during the sleepless night. "I was finishing washing, sir. Mr. Clark came wanting to cross to check the north fields. He asked me to help him. We went into the water. The bottom was slippery and he fell. I tried to catch him, but he was too heavy and the current took him. I couldn't see him in the dark water. I called for help, but no one heard. I thought maybe he made it across and I just couldn't see him. I'm so sorry, sir. I tried to help him. Ruth cries as she says this. Real tears that come easily because she's still terrified from nearly dying. Henderson examines her arms and sees the scratches. How did you get those? He asks. Ruth doesn't hesitate. From his hands, sir. When he was falling, he grabbed at me, trying to catch himself. His fingernails scratched me. I tried to hold him, but he was too heavy and the water was too strong. The scratches actually support her story. Of course, a drowning man would grab at his rescuer. Of course, he would leave marks. Henderson accepts her testimony completely. Why wouldn't he? Ruth is an enslaved woman, powerless, clearly traumatized by witnessing a death she couldn't prevent. Clark was a known drunk. He drowned in a river everyone knew was dangerous. It was obviously a tragic accident. William Clark is buried. Henderson hires a new overseer named Samuel Brooks to replace him. Life continues. Only Ruth knows the truth. That she nearly died committing her first murder. That Clark almost won their underwater fight. That she has to be smarter and more careful if she wants to kill again. And she does want to kill again. Because that moment of holding William Clark underwater until he stopped moving was the most powerful moment of Ruth's entire life. For the first time ever, she had agency. She had control. She had the power of life and death, and she's not giving that power up. Ruth waits 11 months before killing again. She is patient, and she is learning. The first killing taught her that drunk victims are vulnerable, but also unpredictable. Clark nearly killed her with his drowning panic. Ruth needs methods that give her more control, that reduce the chance of the victim fighting back successfully. In September 1850, 11 months after Clark, Ruth kills overseer Marcus Stone using a completely different method that involves no physical confrontation at all. Stone is 29 years old, athletic, dangerous. He's been harassing Ruth for weeks with crude comments and implied threats that he could make her life easier or much harder, depending on her cooperation. On September 15th, a Saturday afternoon, Stone comes to the river while Ruth is washing clothes. He's been drinking, but isn't as drunk as Clark was. "You're awful pretty for a slave," Stone says, standing too close. "Think you and me should spend some private time together." Ruth keeps washing, her mind calculating rapidly. Stone is a threat, but he's also an opportunity. "I don't want trouble, sir," Ruth says quietly, her voice submissive. She steps backward into the river as if trying to escape him. Stone follows, focused entirely on her, watching her body, not watching the water. "Not about what you want, girl," he says. He's wading toward her now, the water rising to his knees, then his thighs. Ruth keeps moving backward, drawing him deeper, aiming for a specific location. She reaches it, a section where the current flows particularly strong due to river channel configuration. Ruth knows from 6 months of study that this spot has a peculiar characteristic. The current flows smooth on the surface but pulls hard at knee level. It's nearly impossible to maintain balance here without knowing to brace against it. Stone doesn't know. Ruth does. "Please don't, sir," Ruth says, still backing away. She's in waist-deep water now. Stone is in chest-deep water, taller but heavier. The underwater current grabs his legs. He stumbles, catches himself. "Stay still, girl," he says, annoyed. He takes another step forward. Ruth stops retreating and stands absolutely still with her feet braced against the current. Stone lunges at her, trying to grab her. Ruth drops underwater at the last second, ducking completely beneath the surface. Stone's momentum carries him forward into empty space. He's off balance over the strongest current. His feet lose the bottom. The current takes him instantly, pulling him toward the deep channel. He goes under. surfaces, goes under again. "Help!" he shouts, genuinely panicked now. Ruth surfaces and wades toward him, but slowly, carefully, calling, "I'm coming, sir," while making sure she stays in the section where she has solid footing. Stone is pulled 15 feet downstream in seconds, 20 feet, 30 feet. He's in the deep channel now, over his head, the current too strong to fight. He goes under and doesn't come back up. Ruth stands watching the spot where he disappeared. She counts 60 seconds. Nothing. She wades to shore and runs toward the plantation, screaming for help. Marcus Stone's body is found the next morning 2 miles downstream, caught in a log jam. Henderson investigates. Ruth testifies tearfully. "He came to check my washing work, sir. I was in the river rinsing clothes. He walked into the water, maybe to test the current because it was high. He slipped and fell, and the water took him so fast. I tried to reach him, but the current was too strong. I ran for help, but he was already gone." Other enslaved people confirm seeing Stone walk toward the river and Ruth run back screaming for help. No one actually witnessed the drowning. Henderson rules it accidental. 2 overseers drowned in less than a year. Some enslaved people start whispering that the river is cursed, that it's killing evil men as punishment. Henderson hires David Mills to replace Stone. Ruth continues washing clothes. She has now perfected 2 different methods: physical combat drowning and current manipulation drowning. She's just getting started. The third killing is different again. David Mills drowns in March 1851, 6 months after Stone. Mills is the new overseer, transferred from South Carolina, unfamiliar with Alabama rivers. He's careful and suspicious by nature, which makes him dangerous, but also makes him vulnerable. Mills comes to the river one afternoon to inspect the washing area, something he does periodically to assert authority. Ruth sees him coming and makes a split-second decision to act now rather than wait for a better opportunity. "Mr. Mills," she calls out respectfully. "Sir, if you're checking the river, I should warn you about the rocks." Mills walks over, interested. "What about the rocks?" Ruth points to a section of the river about 15 feet from shore. "There's a shallow area there that looks safe for crossing, sir, but there's hidden rocks just under the surface that are slippery. Old Overseer Clark used to have me show new people the safe crossing route so nobody fell." This is a lie. Clark never had her do any such thing. But Mills doesn't know that. "Show me," Mills says. Ruth wades into the water. Mills follows. Ruth leads him to the section she indicated, a place where large, smooth rocks sit just below the surface, creating what looks like a shallow ford. "See here, sir," Ruth says, pointing down at the rocks visible through clear water. "Looks like you could walk right across." But the rocks are covered in moss and slippery as ice, and there's a drop-off right beyond them where the bottom falls away to deep water. This is all true. Ruth has studied this section extensively. Mills leans forward to look at the rocks, bending at the waist to see through the water. His weight shifts onto his front foot. Ruth doesn't touch him. She doesn't have to. "You can see the moss, sir? That green coating?" As Mills leans further to look, his front foot reaches a rock. The rock is slippery, exactly as Ruth said. Mills's foot shoots out from under him. He topples forward. His head strikes another rock with a sound like a branch breaking, and Mills goes into the water unconscious. He sinks immediately. Doesn't surface, doesn't thrash. The head injury has knocked him out. He's drowning without even knowing it. Ruth watches for 30 seconds to be certain he's not going to surface. Then she screams for help. Mills's body is recovered an hour later. The head wound is obvious. Henderson rules it accidental death. Mills slipped on rocks while inspecting the river, hit his head, drowned before he could recover. Ruth is praised for trying to warn him about the dangerous rocks. Ruth has now killed 3 men using 3 completely different methods: physical combat, current manipulation, and environmental hazard. Each method leaves her more confident. The fourth killing, 7 months later, is the most intimate and the most disturbing. Thomas Green, the youngest overseer at age 26, drowns in June 1852 while bathing in the river. Green has a habit of coming to the river drunk in the evenings to bathe, believing the cold water sobers him up. On June 23rd, Green arrives at dusk, drunk and in a good mood after a day of relatively light work. He strips to his undergarments and wades into the river. Ruth is still washing clothes nearby. "Girl," Green calls out, "get over here. You can wash my back while I bathe." It's not an unusual request. Enslaved people are expected to provide personal service to overseers whenever requested. Ruth sets down the shirt she was washing and wades over to Green, who is sitting in knee-deep water. "Yes, sir," she says quietly. She picks up a bar of soap from the bank and begins scrubbing Green's back with a cloth. Green sits with his eyes closed, enjoying the service, the alcohol, the cooling water. Ruth scrubs his shoulders, his neck, working methodically. She positions herself behind him, kneeling in the water so her hands can reach his upper back. "That's good," Green mumbles. "Real good." Ruth's hands move from his back to his shoulders. "Lean forward a bit, sir," she says, "so I can get your upper back proper." Green leans forward obediently, his head lowering toward the water. Ruth's hands slide from his shoulders to the back of his head, one hand on his skull, one on his neck. Before Green can react, Ruth pushes his head down and forward with all her strength, driving his face into the water. Green makes a startled sound, tries to push up, but he's drunk and off balance, and Ruth has leverage. She holds him down. Green thrashes, his hands slapping at the water, trying to find purchase. Ruth pushes harder. 15 seconds. 20. Green's thrashing becomes weaker. 30 seconds. 40. He stops moving. Ruth holds him down for another 15 seconds. Then she releases him and steps back. Green's body floats face down in the knee-deep water. Ruth stands up, walks to the bank, and screams. When people come running, she's sobbing hysterically. "He was bathing, and he just fell forward into the water. I think he had some kind of fit, or his heart stopped. I tried to pull him up, but he was too heavy. I tried." Thomas Green's death is ruled accidental drowning, possibly due to heart failure or seizure combined with intoxication. The bruises on the back of his head where Ruth's hands pushed him are attributed to his face hitting the river bottom when he collapsed. Ruth's testimony is accepted without question. 4 overseers dead in less than 3 years. Henderson is beginning to think his plantation might actually be cursed. He hires another replacement. Ruth continues her work. She is now killed using physical combat, environmental manipulation, current engineering, and direct murder disguised as medical emergency. She is 29 years old and has become one of the most successful serial killers in American history. And she's not finished. The 5th through 13th killings over the next 6 years each employ different tactics, each calculated for specific victims and circumstances. Samuel Brooks in April 1853 drowns while crossing to North Fields when Ruth guides him directly into an underwater hole she's discovered, a depression in the river bottom 8 feet deep that's invisible from the surface. Brooks steps into it, goes completely under, panics, inhales water, drowns despite Ruth's frantic attempts to find him in the murky water. Jacob Patterson in November 1853, the head overseer who once whipped Ruth's friend Sarah so badly the woman couldn't walk for a week, drowns after Ruth offers to help him cool his temper following another brutal whipping. Ruth walks him into deep water while he rants drunkenly about ungrateful slaves, positions him carefully, then simply steps aside when he loses balance and lets him drown while maintaining the appearance of trying to help. She holds Patterson underwater longer than any other victim, 30 additional seconds after he stops moving, making absolutely certain. Richard Kane, in May 1854, new overseer from Louisiana, unfamiliar with Alabama rivers, drowns when Ruth offers to show him the safe crossing route, and instead shows him a route that leads directly into the deepest part of the channel. Kane can't swim, goes straight under, never surfaces. William Foster, in October 1854, drowns when Ruth uses her original trip technique, extending her foot between his legs while helping him cross, sending him face first into the water, too drunk to recover. George Hamilton, in March 1855, drowns in the most public death yet when Ruth warns him, "Bank's soft there, sir," about an eroded section where he's leaning over to inspect laundry, but her warning comes exactly 1 second too late. The bank collapses. Hamilton falls into deep water wearing heavy boots, goes straight down. Multiple witnesses see it happen and confirm Ruth tried to warn him. Charles Wilson, in August 1855, drowns while bathing when Ruth brings him soap he forgot, slips while handing it to him, grabs his shoulders for balance, and pushes him under, releases him and swims toward shore calling for help while Wilson drowns behind her. A field hand named Moses sees the interaction from distance and suspects, but tells no one because Moses, like many enslaved people, has figured out what Ruth is doing and approves completely. Edward Brown, in February 1856, drowns from combined hypothermia and current when Ruth helps him cross in winter cold, taking him on an unnecessarily long route that maximizes his time in near-freezing water until he's too weak to fight the current. Henry Taylor, in September 1856, another overseer who approached Ruth with rape intentions, drowns after Ruth leads him into the strongest current section pretending to flee from him, then watches him get swept away while she maintains solid footing in the spot she's practiced standing in hundreds of times. James Anderson, in November 1858. The 13th and final victim drowns drunk at night when Ruth, who has been reassigned away from the river for 15 months, makes a deliberate choice to approach him and offer help crossing one final time, using her original method of positioning him over slippery bottom and holding him under when he falls. 13 men. 9 years. 13 completely different methods of murder, all ruled accidental deaths. Ruth testified at every inquest, cried at every funeral, maintained perfect innocence. The community of enslaved people gradually realized what she was doing. Instead of exposing her, they protected her. They confirmed her alibis. They praised her attempts to help. They mourned publicly and celebrated privately. Ruth was not operating alone. She was executing justice on behalf of 163 people who had no other recourse. After James Anderson's death in November 1858, Master Henderson makes an unprecedented decision driven by economics and superstition combined. 13 overseers dead in 9 years. The position has become impossible to fill. No one wants to work at Henderson Plantation where overseers keep drowning. The few who accept demand double wages. Henderson calculates that paying high wages for positions that keep turning over through death is unsustainable. His solution is to eliminate the overseer position entirely. Instead, he promotes 3 enslaved men to driver positions with limited authority to organize work, but no whips and no punishment authority. Actual discipline returns to Henderson himself, who is far less likely to use it since he's not in the fields daily. The result is that 163 enslaved people work from November 1858 to April 1861, 2.5 years, under a dramatically less brutal system. Less violence, less terror, less casual cruelty. All because 13 overseers died and Henderson couldn't replace them. Ruth Freeman is 37 years old in 1858. She has killed 13 men using 13 different methods over 9 years. She has reformed a plantation system through serial murder, and she has done it so perfectly that no one except the enslaved community knows the truth. The psychological cost Ruth carries is immense and permanent. After the first killing, she vomited and shook for hours, terrified of discovery and traumatized by nearly dying. After the second, she felt satisfaction more than fear. By the third, she felt almost nothing during the act itself, only calculation and focus. By the 10th killing, Ruth has become something she barely recognizes. A person who can look into a man's eyes while drowning him and feel nothing except clinical assessment of whether he's dead yet. The nightmares start early and never stop. She dreams about Clark strangling her underwater. She dreams about Stone being pulled away by current while calling for help she didn't provide. She dreams about Green's head under her hands and Patterson's body floating downstream, and all the others. She wakes up gasping, certain she's drowning, certain she's being held under. During the day, Ruth functions normally, works in fields after being reassigned, speaks to other people, maintains her mask. But inside, she's broken in ways that will never heal. She wonders if she's evil, if 13 murders make her a monster regardless of who the victims were. She wonders if God exists and if he'll forgive her. She wonders if the murdered men's mothers and wives and children grieve them, and if their grief is her fault. These questions follow her for the rest of her life. The Civil War begins in April 1861. Alabama secedes. Henderson Plantation continues operating through war years with diminished labor. The war ends in April 1865. Slavery is abolished. Ruth Freeman is 44 years old and free for the first time. She leaves Henderson Plantation in May 1865 with nothing but her clothes and 44 years of terrible memories. Ruth settles in Montgomery, finds work as a laundress, washing clothes for wages. The irony is profound. She spent 9 years washing clothes as a slave and using that position to kill overseers. Now she's washing clothes as a free woman, earning money. She lives quietly in Montgomery for 43 years, never marries, never has children, attends church every Sunday praying for forgiveness she's not sure she deserves. She never speaks of the 13 overseers during her lifetime. But in 1906, when Ruth is 85 and dying of pneumonia, she calls for a young black minister named Reverend James Cooper. Over 3 days, struggling to breathe, Ruth describes her 9 years as a serial killer in complete detail. 13 murders, 13 methods, the near-death fight with Clark, the community's protection, the guilt she carries. She asks Cooper, "Was I evil? Was I a soldier? Or was I both?" Cooper has no answer. Ruth dies on March 7, 1908, age 86. Cooper keeps his promise and writes down her confession, publishing it in 1910 in a book of oral histories largely ignored by white historians. Modern historians have verified substantial parts of Ruth's account. Records confirm 13 overseers died at Henderson Plantation between 1849 and 1858, all by accidental drowning. Death certificates exist. Newspaper articles mention the unusual pattern. A letter from Henderson to his brother discusses difficulty hiring due to the death pattern. Henderson's decision to discontinue the overseer position is documented. Statistical analysis shows a 65% mortality rate among overseers during that period, essentially impossible through pure chance. Historians conclude Ruth's confession is substantially true. She did kill 13 men over 9 years using the river as her weapon. The method was plausible. The opportunity existed. The motive is obvious. And the results? The reformation of Henderson Plantation's system through death attrition actually occurred. Ruth Freeman was a serial killer operating under slavery, and she was extraordinarily successful. The moral implications are impossible to resolve cleanly. Ruth killed 13 human beings, but she was enslaved under a system that gave her no rights, no protection, no legal recourse against violence. The men she killed terrorized 163 people with complete impunity. Were her killings justified? That depends on whether you believe enslaved people had the right to kill their oppressors, whether extra-legal violence becomes moral when legal systems provide no justice, whether ending 13 evil lives to reduce suffering for 163 people is acceptable. There are no easy answers. Ruth Freeman's grave exists in Montgomery in a cemetery for black residents. The marker reads, Ruth Freeman, 1821 to 1908. She rests in the Lord. Nothing mentions what she did for 9 years at Henderson Plantation. Nothing mentions 13 dead overseers or a river that became a weapon. But the truth exists in Reverend Cooper's book, and in the historical record, and in the memory of descendants who know their ancestors worked 3 years without overseers because 13 violent men kept drowning. Remember Ruth Freeman. Remember that she was 28 when she started, and nearly died during her first killing when William Clark strangled her underwater. Remember that she learned 13 different ways to kill men in a river and executed each method perfectly. Remember that she was never caught because everyone underestimated what an enslaved woman could accomplish. Remember that resistance takes many forms, that sometimes justice comes from dark places, that people under oppression make impossible choices and live with impossible guilt. Remember that 163 enslaved people worked under reduced violence because 13 overseers died and the position became too dangerous to fill. Remember that Ruth lived 43 years as a free woman carrying the weight of 13 deaths and believing to the end that what she did was necessary. The Coosa River still flows past where Henderson Plantation once stood. If you stand on the bank where Ruth stood washing clothes, you can imagine her watching the water, calculating depths and currents, waiting for violent men to ask for help. You can imagine 13 men going under and not coming up. You can imagine one woman turning a river into a graveyard and a weapon into justice. Ruth Freeman proved that even the powerless can fight back if they're patient enough, smart enough, and willing to pay the price. 13 men dead, 9 years of perfect patience, 13 different methods, one woman who changed a plantation forever.